Darney is the director of the production that you've seen tonight. Dr. Julian Bird played Sigmund Freud, obviously, and Sean Browne obviously played C.S. Lewis. So thank you guys for joining us. And now you can clap. Okay, so I want to start with actually, I had one more question to ask, and you guys don't answer this either. Who believes that God exists? One. Okay, you're not many. Okay, who believes God definitely doesn't exist?
It'd be good to be able to see people.
Can you see?
I can't see people.
Can we raise the house lights a little bit? Okay, sorry, let's start again. Who believes that God exists? Okay, gentleman here. Who believes that God definitely doesn't exist?
Can you define God?
Who is not sure or hasn't agreed on the definition of God? Okay, am I covered? Okay, so more people in the second and third category there. Interesting. All right. Before we talk about that really big question, let's talk a little bit about the play itself. This is a play by an American writer, St Germain, which had its Off-Broadway premiere over 10 years ago now. This actually marks its European premiere. And so I want to start with Peter. Peter, how did you come across this play, and why, 10 or so years on, did you want to bring it to London?
So I came across actually Julian sent me the play.
Amazing.
We've been working on a play that we're writing together, and we were looking at projects to do, and Julian sent me the play, and I thought, oh my God, what an amazing idea for a psychiatrist to play Freud, a psychiatrist turned actor to play Freud, and obviously looking at how it had done across the world, it's been really successful off-Broadway, it's played in Australia, it's just opened in Korea, hasn't it? Like, at the same time as us, it's opened in Korea. And I thought that it was really interesting that two massively influential figures in British culture, whose resonance is still, profoundly felt today, and yet the play hadn't been over here, so I thought that it was about time to do it.
Yeah.
And so when the opportunity arose, we took it.
Amazing. So actually then, you've partly answered the next question I was going to direct at Julian. So Julian, you obviously came across the play first, and I want to hear about that. But Peter has said, in case you didn't know, a great selling point of this production is that Sigmund Freud is played by yourself, who is a real-life psychiatrist turned actor. So, and I've read some great interviews, if you haven't, in which you talk about the parallels between psychiatry and acting. But first, let's rewind to Peter saying that you came across the play. What attracted you to it, and did you just think, well, this is a part that's custom made for me, so let's do it?
Yes, it was a friend of mine who had been working with an American director. There's another actor we're talking about, and they had negotiated the rights and didn't get very far. But it was through my friend and his connection with this American director who had some kind of connection with the author. I don't know if they're personal friends, but he knew the author to some degree. So it was going to be myself playing Freud. That was what my mate was very keen to see. Playing a shrink was such an obvious idea. And then we were not able to get the rights for complicated reasons I won't bore everyone with. The negotiations didn't work. I suspect that it's because of Peter's skilled negotiations that we actually then got the rights quite a while afterwards.
So did you relish the idea of playing Sigmund Freud?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, he's a huge figure, and of course I have to know a certain amount about Freud.
Yeah.
I'm not a Freudian analyst. I don't practice psychoanalysis very few people do now, but it's nevertheless clear that he's a hugely important figure in our history, and of course in the history of psychiatry itself, of course, hugely important. Yeah, sure.
And I mentioned that you had said in interviews that you see parallels between psychiatry and acting. What are those parallels?
Oh, yes, it didn't really occur to me until I got to drama school. And when I was at Central, it dawned on me that there were some obvious parallels. Well, if you're a psychiatrist, of course, the reason why you're a psychiatrist is because you're fascinated by people and how what it is that makes them behave the way they do, and particularly, of course, it's always fascinating to guess what the hidden and even unconscious motives for people's behaviour might be, and that was very obvious when I was at drama school, that's also what you have to do when you've got a character that you're going to play. You've got to start thinking about the motivation, what makes this person behave the way they behave, and what is it in their past that might have been the formative experiences. So it's very much like practicing psychiatry. Sure.
Interesting. Okay, so Sean, you obviously also playing a real life person and a giant of the 20th century. How much did you know about C.S. Lewis before you took on this part, and how much have you learned since working on the play?
I knew that he'd written the Narnia stories because I grew up with them, and that was kind of pretty much it. But when Peter invited me to audition, and straight away I started, like, the first place you go is Wikipedia, because it's just everything you get. Like, I absolutely bricked it straight away because he was born in Belfast. My Belfast accent is kind of 80%, it's okay, but I was like, oh no. The second thing I did was went on YouTube, because he used to do radio addresses, and there's only like 2 of them, there's about half hour still surviving, and you can listen to him speak, and I was so relieved because he's just got a lovely RP accent, and he doesn't have any Belfast vowels in there. But yeah, I think I said in the audition when I came in, I think I tried to like impress them with my knowledge of C.S. Lewis, what I'd learned. And I think I said, Russell Crowe famously said that, if you do 100 hours of research and it makes your performance 5% better, that's 5%. And that is something that I genuinely do, not just say at auditions to try and sort of gain favour, I do genuinely subscribe to that. So I've been, since hearing about the audition, I've been reading, I've got 11 of his books, and I'm about 4 books through. First book I read was The Question of God, which the play is based on. I would say that I am an amateur expert on C.S. Lewis.
There's going to be some bonding going on here.
I've still got loads to learn, and to be honest, you're probably way better at. I'd love to go toe to toe for some facts and figures. But the thing about the character is that although I'm playing a real life person, I'm also playing a character in a play, so I get with obviously Peter, a wonderful director who's super talented. Like, genuinely, I say in rehearsal room, there's like 2 of me, because if I have a good idea, he's got like twice as many. I get to make choices about the character, so although I'm playing a real life character, I also don't need to be slavish in terms of, but I don't know if this or that, because I can make a decision, based on, is that how we want to sort of like guide the narrative and guide the character.
And what is your accent? I love it.
London Irish. I was raised born in London, raised in Ireland, in Dublin and London. Had a Dublin accent until I was about 6 years of age. Had to go to speech therapy because everyone thought I was American. My accent, I can speak. No. It's just when I was a little kid, I saw the kids. They were like, "You American?" I was like, "No, I'm not." But yeah, I've got a weird accent. I've got like a millennial English accent, so I either try and sound as posh as I can, not quite as posh as Lewis, but I either sound as posh as I can. If I'm with family or I've had a few, I sound more Irish.
Okay, well there we go. It's a good thing we're at a pub. We're going to have all sorts of challenges there. Very good. I was going to say something and I've forgotten what it was, so I'm going to open the floor to the questions now. Thank you for getting us rolling. Now, who's going to go first to follow that up? We're going to come back to the experts. Let's hear from the Back row there.
Hi, you've already asked the question I was going to ask, so I'll ask a different one.
Oh, right.
I really enjoyed the play. Thank you very much. It was great. I'm a big fan of talking heads when there's just a single person on stage, but I love a two-hander as well. I wondered what the challenges are for putting that on and how you present it and keep it dynamic and keep the audience engaged, which you did. But I'd like to hear about that.
Oh, and you've just reminded me the thing I was going to add, is in case everyone isn't clear, that we do not believe that Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis ever met in real life. So this is an imagined scenario and a very engaging one, as you pointed out. So, Peter, how do you direct these two great actors to make talking heads, because there's not really as much of a narrative arc? How do you keep it interesting?
Yeah, so it was one of the challenges when I read the play. There's a lot of words in this play. There are a lot of words, and thinking about how can that become animated? How can that be physical? How can we see the relationship between the two people as well as hear it through the words and see it in the gestures? How do we see it in the proximity between them? How do we make the space feel alive and dynamic and bring a physical life to the play? So one of the first decisions that I made when I knew that we were going to bring it here was to stage it in the way that we have, to put the audience on three sides and to give us this kind of long, deep thrust is the technical term, playing space. Because I wanted to put people kind of like they were around these two in a ring, but we also had this idea that we wanted to try and make it feel like you were sort of inside their heads, and that this battle of wits had happened, exploded a bit above you. So we've got their writings and images of war above you. We've got the gods sort of putting a ring around them, and I suppose a lot of what we did with the voiceovers as well, and how we sort of manipulated the sound and the lights, was about actually, obviously it was about creating an insight into the world of the minds that are hearing this, and seeing the, we'd also had the idea that we wanted to bring surrealism into the set, because Sigmund Freud's work was absolutely crucial in the surrealist movement ever being able to become a thing. So that was kind of something that we wanted to bring into the set. So we were looking at how we actually gave your eyes a rest and gave them something else to see, and made the set and world look different for a while, so you weren't stuck in a rigid naturalism for 80 minutes of two people talking that could have been quite static. So those were the things that we really thought about before we were coming into the room.
And let us just give a shout out then to other members of your creative team. So wonderful set design by Brad Caleb Lee, lighting by Claire O'Donoghue, and music and sound by Sam Golossa. And really well done. And I believe you also, as a company, and I wonder if this also included a designer, but you went to visit the Freud Museum in Hampstead, so the study where the action takes place. Is that right? Was that inspiring for you all? Let's hear from the actors first.
Sure.
Julian, had you been before?
I've been before, yes, but it's been quite a few years ago. So yes, it was a very important part of the preparation.
Yeah.
And there were even more gods on the desk than I had anticipated. It was amazing. It really was fascinating.
It is
Right.
wonderful, isn't it? I mean, the study is so
Religious
cluttered.
artifacts.
It's like
It's
kind of
extraordinary.
overwhelming. Yeah.
Quite extraordinary. Yeah, sure.
And Sean?
I really enjoyed it. The same thing. It's just everywhere. I took pictures of all the artifacts because they're on the desk, they're in cabinets, and took pictures of just all the books that he had. So I got to go home and then sort of just see what this man was reading. I don't spend that much time, obviously, because all my focus is on the great Sigmund Freud. I don't spend that much time taking in the study, but I like to, when I first walk in, I imagine like, oh yeah, these are all the books, and I've got visual references. Same as I took loads of pictures of the garden, So when I look out into the garden, I was like, yeah, I know what I'm looking at. I know that there aren't beech trees, but they kind of look like beech trees. You know, so it was just that. It was just giving, because it is a surrealist set, giving the imagination a reference.
Yeah. It's a beautiful place, by the way. Who's been to the Freud Museum? Yeah, really recommend for those of you who haven't done it. It's very good. Okay, here.
My question has been answered very, very well. The question was for Sean about the three characters you got. One is very secure and happy-chappy. The caring one when Freud is sick, and the insecure one when Freud comes into sexuality. My question has been answered. Thank you.
Oh, cool. I appreciate
You've
it.
been doing all the research and trying to understand the man, and you know much more than I do, so you really understand the face of being a Christian. I don't know which kind of Christian I am, but I am a Christian and you are not. And then being insecure about bisexuality. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I really appreciate that, because by the sounds of it, like, I didn't play just a one-dimensional or two-dimensional character, which is obviously never the intention, because he's a fallen soldier with PTSD who knows pain intimately, who questions his idea of God. It's only an idea. He is not a subscribe. He doesn't. C.S. Lewis never subscribed to any one particular church, although he went to Holy Trinity, and all the time. So all the different facets. So I'm going to take that to the bank. I'm going to tell my mum about you. Thank you.
Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, experts. What are your
We're
questions?
not subscribing to the expert.
Okay. But did you have a question?
Yes.
Yes, you have a question, and then we'll come to you. Yeah.
First of all, thank you. It was so enjoyable, and I'm a Freud, I suppose you could say, follower, enthusiast, curious. I practice in mental health, so I read a lot from his works that inform the way I think about problems. And he is a larger-than-life figure. A lot of people, when they look at him, they use words such as disciple, for instance, or followers, or imply a greater image than perhaps just a human being. And I'm sorry, my question is single-handedly towards Freud, because maybe that I am biased, but and there has been some few, portraits of him, biographies that have come up that show of him as a somebody who wanted to play God, for instance, somebody who always had to have the last word. So of his atheistic views, but his belief in grand people who shaped the history of the world. For instance, he liked Schliemann as well, or people who made a difference. I was wondering, do you think he wanted to play God, he had a big ego, or he had an honest appreciation of his power and intelligence and genius as well?
So if I can just, that's a really good question. I'm going to try to summarize it, maybe. Do you think Freud was trying to play God? Is that the simplistic way of saying it?
Yes.
Or was he aware of his own powers over other people?
Not over other people.
No.
I didn't mean it manipulative, just his talent and the extent of it.
Okay, thank you.
My reading of it is he certainly was determined to influence people. It was very important to him that his ideas should be heard and, if possible, acted upon. I don't know about playing God. I've never thought of it like that. I'm a doctor, so there are times when I suppose I've played God myself. I suppose. I hadn't thought of it for Freud. He sure, I think, had a very strong sense of his own importance. And he was combative in making sure that people knew what he was on about. And he fell out with a lot of people, as you would know. Also, because there was a core of followers that remained loyal to him, but I found that development of the movement was very much parallel to the development of the early church. The way they fell out with each other vigorously, hated each other from time to time. And that was true of the early church, of course, as well as the psychoanalytic movement.
Okay, thank you. Yes, question here, and then we'll come here.
Okay, it's a question to both actors, but different questions, if that's okay. First of all, huge compliments, really enjoyed it, engaged throughout. Being a psychiatrist is either a help or a hindrance because who you're playing, and I'd like to understand that. And are you an atheist? Does that help as well? And when you thought about the part, because you had invited C.S. Lewis, what was in your mind that said, why did I invite C.S. Lewis, so that then helped you with the script that went on? And as for C.S. Lewis, Surprise of Joy, which may be one of the books you've read, had it helped you to envisage a surprise of joy of your own, which allowed you to see how that helped you convert to a moving God that he became C of E, but that was just for comfort reasons rather than
Goodness me, these are tough questions. Wow, we've got a knowledgeable audience. Okay, again, I'm going to just recap slightly. So, Julian, what do you imagine the character of Sigmund Freud, the reason he had invited C.S. Lewis to see him that day?
I think it's a mixture, of course. I think he is genuinely fascinated by the religious experience. He's fascinated about people's minds generally, of course, but he is particularly fascinated by the religious experience. He wanted to understand it. So some of this is intellectual fascination, but I think probably what we've, of course, discussed this kind of thing during rehearsal. I think there's also a part of Freud that was wondering whether there might be an afterlife, that he might actually be considering, reconsidering his atheism, and maybe he really wants to hear from C.S. Lewis something comforting about what's going to happen when he dies, which is going to happen very soon.
Yeah, so he actually does, with the help of Dr. Scher, commit suicide
Yes,
less than
sure.
3 weeks later, doesn't he?
Yeah.
We're going to come back to the actor's beliefs, maybe, if we have time. But in terms of the Surprise of Joy question, have you read The Surprise of Joy?
Yeah. That was the second book I read.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think that your character of C.S. Lewis is thinking about this as he is entering the home of Sigmund Freud?
Certainly throughout the course of the conversation that they have, yeah. I mean, when he, because he's describing how... Yeah, exactly. The lovely thing about, although Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis never actually met, reading Surprised by Joy, Mere Christianity, bunch of books, almost every line of the play is written by has been spoken or written by Freud or Lewis. So it's actually based on a book where a Harvard professor, Dr. Armand Nikolai, basically went, these are Freud's opinions on atheism. C.S. Lewis says this in actual literal response to Freud, and then he basically compiled a book, and it was Mark St Germain who went, imagine if we dramatised it. So it's quite nice, everything is real.
Now, is anyone else in the audience thinking we've got a really long reading list after tonight? Maybe I need to go read all these things. Thank you for that very knowledgeable question. Do you feel intimidated?
Well, always, but it was absolutely fantastic. Really enjoyed it, and so many things to kind of reflect upon, I think, over a period of time. Part of my question's been answered because, the fact that they didn't meet would these have been the kind of conversations they'd would have, and clearly, given that it was based on these kind of narratives, yes. But there was one aspect of it that I was really interested in, which was the humour, the reference to kind of humour in it, and jokes. And I kind of didn't know whether that was part of their personalities, or because their ideas are incredibly serious and profound and important. But was humour, was joke part of it, or was that something that you kind of evolved either in the play or you brought to it?
That was a great line. I actually wrote that down. That Sigmund Freud is saying that our defense is humor. Our brains cannot hold on to horror.
Yeah.
It's very good. Yes, Julian.
He was fascinated by humour. I'm not sure what kind of sense of humour he really had of his own. I'm not sure about that. I suspect it was very different from mine. But he's written a lot about humour, and he thinks it's a very important part of our inner world. Sure.
I really like the bits of humour that kind of deflected potential tension. I mean, it acknowledged tension, but you know, it kind of used that tension to create a different sort of feel to it.
Well, I watched about 5 documentaries. There's an amazing amount of documentaries on Amazon and YouTube about C.S. Lewis, and I watched them all over Christmas. And it was like one of his biographers, who was also like a friend, said, "Oh, he loved a giggle. He was great for a chat." And yeah, we noticed, Peter pointed out in the play, like C.S. Lewis in particular attempts to use humour as a sort of like diversionary tactic, and that was just nice. To be honest, I've got a lovely picture of C.S. Lewis, and he's just got the loveliest little impish smile. And yeah. So I think Lewis definitely knew how to like hold court and have a joke.
Yeah, very
We
nice.
talked, didn't we, in rehearsals about the idea of relief theory is populated through the play. That the tension builds up between them, and they have to that humour is the valve that lets the pressure out of that cooker, and that it's in the script and it's in the relationship between these two people that they had to find those moments to let it out, and that those came through humour. I think it was actually the playwright very cleverly setting up the idea of relief theory and then populating it throughout right up to the end.
Have you spoken to him at all through this production, Mark St Germain?
A couple of emails, yeah.
Okay.
Not spoken. No.
Okay.
I mean, it's been, you have to, our rehearsal period was through the height of Omicron, and the height of Omicron in just outside of New York, where he's based. He was going to come over, it got cancelled. We didn't even, there was certainly a time where we had no idea whether we would actually open this show or not. I also work in Cardiff. My theatre that I work for there is still shut, so it's a very different world up here to back there. So there was a world in which it was going to be fantastic to welcome Mark to press night and to have Zooms with him and have him here and with all the different pressures that happened in the world while we were trying to make this.
He's a man of my age, so he had clearly some worries about the journey, because there were a lot of changes going on in travel restrictions and whether you could fly, and I think that's the reason why he decided eventually that he wasn't going to come.
Yeah.
I wanted to say as well, just well done for getting it on with everything that we've all been through, but theatres, as we've mentioned, have just been devastated yet again for countless times over the past 2 years. So to have a show on it all and still be healthy, thank you.
Please.
Okay, now I think we do have to wind up, so let's just hear what all the final questions are, and we'll try to rapid fire. What's your
Forgive me if I
question?
ramble on. First off, fantastic production, beautiful performances,
Thank you.
very powerful. I've been exploring religious questions of my own for the first time, trying to be less judgmental, and partly thanks to public intellectuals like Jordan Peterson. And so, I'm here tonight, and I can't help but to think of Carl Jung in juxtaposition to Freud, because he had a very different relationship to religion. And I suppose, I'm wondering now that I know that you are an actual doctor, sir, how you might feel, since you invested so much in Freud, or personally, do you relate or sympathize more with one or the other? And I'm pretty sure, but I'm not certain, that Jung may have had a heavy influence on C.S. Lewis as well. So
Okay,
this is
that's a big question. Yeah. But I want to, because we already touched on what the people on the stage think about the existence of God. I want to just come back to that at the end. So do think about that, because we do all clearly want to hear whether you believe God exists, or not?
Well,
Do
that's
you
not,
side
that's
with
not what
one?
I'm asking.
Okay, all right. Sorry. That's a big question. What were the other questions?
Yeah, I just want to quickly address something that you probably disagree, but from what I understand, that before the split with Jung, that Freud was as much of an almost was walking parallel lines together with him as a kind of a mystic, and it was only the horror of the depth of Jung's mysticism that came out in certain examples which terrified him. For example, the crack in the wardrobe was going to be a crack now, and there's a massive crack and he just couldn't take it anymore. All to do with the people that he... Anyway, it was like that. So I genuinely think that he was a mystic, but he had to run from it.
Ah, interesting. And behind you, there was a
Well,
question.
there was an earlier comment along the lines of, from yourself as the psychiatrist. Psychoanalysis is not a big thing now, and to some extent, Freud is not centre stage. Can you explain that for someone who doesn't really understand it? Or I have read some of the books, but just why make some sort of comment like that, and if you didn't, just put me right.
So why psychoanalysis is no longer in fashion? Okay, we're going to come back and we're going to address all these as quickly as we can. Yes?
Last July I was working in Belfast on where C.S. Lewis was born. I was working on peace and reconciliation. And there was a mural, originally 20 years ago, there was a mural of two guys with AK-47s. And they are trying to get rid of the murals, obviously. People that being Irish should understand that. So they painted C.S. Lewis on the wall, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And the journalist from the BBC was very sceptical about this and asked the creator of this, what difference would it make? We said, the house to the left has got a 6-year-old girl. And for the first 6 years of her life, all she saw when she looked out of her bedroom window in the morning was two men with AK-47s. Now when she looks outside our window, she sees The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Don't you think that would make a difference to that child's life? How she feels going to school every day?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I've seen that mural, but I didn't know that story. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that's where I learned that C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and he said, I was dragged into the Catholic, into the kingdom of God, kicking and screaming. That's exactly what he said, which was fascinating to come here tonight, and because I wasn't expecting, I didn't actually look into what the play was. I wanted to be surprised, and I was.
Thank you. And was there one? Yep. Here.
Thank you so much. And I have a question for Peter. Did you have to make adaptations or changes with the original script for this specific show? Because there is different audience, different country, different culture.
Okay. So, we've heard the questions. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so let's try to do as much as we can, as quickly as we can. I'm sorry I've misrepresented your question, but something to do with Carl Jung, and does anyone want to comment on Carl Jung? Any comments?
I think he's great personally, but I don't know if personally, I just don't know if C.S. Lewis, how much he was, if he was at all influenced by Jung. Obviously Freud, but I don't know about Lewis.
Julian, do you know?
My feelings about Jung?
Well, I could almost envision Lewis as a stand-in for Carl Jung in the debates that he and Freud would, their conflict, butting heads in terms
Because you've been reading Jung recently.
religious questions. I've never read Jung myself.
Oh, you
but I've listened to countless podcasts and
Okay, that one, we'll carry on talking
What's
about.
your dangerous method?
Yeah, there we go. Mysticism, I don't even think I can recap that, but mysticism, do you see these characters, these titans as mystics walking line together?
As I said, he had to run from it because he couldn't handle Jung's depth of mysticism. It was too much, along with everything else that was going on. And their split was complicated, but that was a huge part of it, I believe.
Okay.
I will just jump in and say I don't think C.S. Lewis ran away from anything, or certainly not mysticism or magic. Yeah, I know, but I'm just jumping in. Yeah, no, I don't think. I think if Freud did have to sort of back away from that level of mysticism that Jung was representing or expressing, I don't think C.S. Lewis would or did.
I think you should talk to the Jungian guy here afterwards. But Julian, do you want to quickly address this gentleman's point about what do you mean by psychoanalysis no longer being in fashion?
Yes, it's because psychiatry has changed hugely in the 50s and 60s and become part of medicine, and the reason is that we are trained to base everything on evidence, and there is no evidence of any of Freud's analytic ideas. That it's not testable in a scientific way. They're all fascinating, but there is no evidence that can be relied on. I'm a fan of Karl Popper, the philosopher, who says that the touchstone is disprovability, and you can't. So it's more like religion rather than science. Although Freud, of course, called it science, he was very, very keen on being a scientist. But nowadays, we would not think of it as science at all.
Interesting. Ooh.
The evidence is not there.
Some heads and hands.
That's what I concluded from reading The Interpretation of Dreams. I've got about 2/3 way through and thought, nah, Carol.
I love this audience. You guys are inspiring. Okay, and then finally, Peter, did you change the script at all?
Are you speaking to the writer's agent?
We're going to say no to you.
I changed the word radio to wireless.
That's British. There we go. Okay, and then just finally, now you must answer the question which I asked from the audience in the beginning. Hands up. Who of you believes in God? The existence of God?
I'm an atheist.
You are an
and
atheist?
I don't know a single psychiatrist who isn't atheist.
Interesting.
I'm blessed because I've I've experienced something that my esteemed colleague obviously hasn't, so I'm a theist.
Okay, interesting. And Peter?
I think I'm the perfect director for this because I'm agnostic.
That sounds really
open to suggestions either
this
side.
Fascinating debate that is encapsulated in this play, has it made you think about things in a different way?
Yeah.
It's helped me to learn more about the relationship and the way relationships change. But then it's not just this play that does that, it's acting that does that.
Mm-hmm.
You learn more about the way relationships work by acting.
Yeah.
If it's a good play, then you learn a lot about human beings and the way they relate to each other. Mm-hmm. And that was a part of the parallel with psychiatry that we were talking about. It's been a very central part of my life is how I learned through acting much more than about relationships than I did when I was being trained as a psychiatrist.
Fascinating. Maybe all psychiatrists should do acting.
I thought that myself, yes. Yeah.
Sean, has this being in this play challenged your beliefs in any way?
No. No, like I said, I don't know, but I have an idea, much like C.S. Lewis as the end of the play, and I really enjoy exploring that idea because every day that I'm alive, I'm really grateful for that. No, not really. Life will make you question it and go really seriously, and I'm as scared as C.S. Lewis, at the very end when Freud says, one of us, if this isn't true, then we'll never know, and that does kind of, that's the only time in the play that Lewis actually goes, oh shit, I'm considering. But no, not really.
Well, this discussion has made me even more convinced that you have the perfect casting for Sigmund Freud and C.S. Lewis and these two wonderful performers. And thank you. And I wish, if all of the debates that we had these days was as civilized and as good-natured as depicted in this play and in this post-show, I think we'd be in a much healthier place, all of us, wouldn't we? But please join me and thank you. Oh, I was going to say, actually, when we do a big clap, for those of you who are on social media, I'm going to pose with these guys in the background with some signs. Will you please take a photo and share it and send out to all your followers and encourage them to come see the show? Yes, shake your head. Nod your head. And join me in thanking Peter and Dr. Julian Bird and Sean Browne. Thank you.